Alright, I'm getting ready to install my oil pan. This is my 95 Saturn dual overhead cam engine. I've been doing a lot of work to this car. Just doing this as a project here at home in my garage. Something to do, it's a learning experience. I research each of my steps before I move forward. And while an oil pan doesn't sound too complicated, I actually read a lot of horror stories about people having problems getting them to seal. So I want to share with you what I'm going to do, all the tips that I learned, and hopefully this will help you get your oil pan installed right the first time without these leaks. Now this information will apply to most vehicles out there. This Saturn engine does not use an oil pan gasket, it uses sealant, so I'm going to show you about that. One of the first steps that you want to do after you get your oil pan off is remove your old gasket material. Now this engine block is aluminum and it's really important not to gouge this surface up. So a lot of times the oil pan sealant can simply be rubbed off or peeled off. Other times you're going to have quite a stubborn amount of it stuck. So you can use something like a sharp putty knife, but you want to be really careful that you don't gouge this up. Keep it at a very shallow angle, work slowly, get your stuff scraped off. Another thing that you can use, which I usually do, is a razor blade. Works pretty good. Again, be careful not to gouge up the surface. Now, as far as your oil pan goes, it's got this indentation and the sealant goes down in there and squeezes out around. So even if you scrape this surface, it's not going to get the material from down inside, and you need to get that out. What I found works well is a wire wheel on a drill. It really gets down in there without much effort, gets all the material scraped out. So you need to get most of your material off of here and off of here. Next thing is, when you're removing your oil pan, remember it's held on with sealant and bolts. Take your bolts out, it's adhered to your engine. So a lot of times you've got to work it loose by prying it. And what that does is it distorts your oil pan. The oil pan is just very simple sheet metal and it bends easily. So let's take a look at how we can go ahead and get our oil pan flattened back out. Alright, so you pried your oil pan off of your engine like a gorilla. You went and bent it up. We need to make sure that we get it back nice and flat. So first thing you're going to need is a surface that you're pretty confident is flat. This is a slab of 1.5 inch thick steel plate, and I'm pretty sure it's flat. Metal surfaces, they can be warped. Wooden surfaces can, and you'd think a concrete floor would be flat, but a lot of times they have waves in them from finishing. So you need to find a surface that you feel is flat. So drop your oil pan on there, push it on different corners, and it'll probably teeter a little bit. This one did when I started with it. From here to here, I found out was a little raised up. I determined that by looking down the line, like you would if you're inspecting a piece of lumber, and I could see the wave in it. At that point, I knew what needed to be done. I hung that edge over, took a scrap of 2x4, gave it some wax to persuade it a little bit. This sheet metal is a little bit thicker than I could bend by hand, so a block of wood works good, doesn't damage it. After I hit it a few times, I felt I was in a good position. Put it back up here, well, it teetered the other direction, so I had gone a little too far. No big deal. Picked it up, took my 2x4, whacked it a few times that way, put it up here, it's nice and flat, doesn't wobble at all. So we're good to move forward. This oil pan was in pretty rough shape. I decided to go ahead and sandblast it, and then I painted it with this high temperature engine paint. You can click here to see the video about that. Here you can see that there was some pitting on it, but I decided this oil pan was still viable. Now if your oil pan is in good shape, go ahead and reuse it. If it's not so good, well, you need to decide whether or not to replace it. If it's readily available and inexpensive, by all means just go buy a new one. If it's a rare or hard to find one, you might be stuck with doing a cleanup or a patch job. Here's something else to think about. Here on our oil pan, some of the holes have some distortion where the lip of the hole has been forced up from the torque of the bolt. Now, I read that this can contribute to leaking, so depending on how bad yours are, you might choose to punch these back down flat prior to installation. Here's a tip that I learned on a forum, and I strongly suggest that you do the same. Throughout this project, I've been cleaning the threads on all the holes because after 200,000+ miles, a lot of garbage collects. You may have sealant in there, you may have Loctite, oil, grime, garbage. All you need to do is find something that's the same threads as your bolts and cut some slits in them. You can use a hacksaw or a cutoff tool. Cutting these slits provides a sharp cutting edge so that it can cut through any debris. It also makes a cavity to capture the debris and bring it back out. At that point, you just thread it down in, bring it back out, and you will most likely find that this is full of junk. Brush it off with a wire brush and move on to the next hole. By making sure that all these are clean, you know that you're not going to have problems during reassembly. Just as important as cleaning the threads in your block is cleaning the threads on your fasteners. These had sealant in them and grime. You don't want to be fighting that. I just put them into a little cup of carburetor cleaner, then wire brushed them. They came out looking fine. Now I know I'm not going to have problems. Also, count all of your fasteners ahead of time. Make sure you have everything you need. Once you apply the sealant, you don't have time to be screwing around looking for lost bolts. You risk having leaks if you do. Now, I'm going to clean the mating surfaces of my oil pan and my block with acetone. It's very important to clean them with something that's not going to leave a residue. I have had really good luck with acetone. Other people have reported brake cleaner. Use whatever you want. Personally, acetone is readily available, it's inexpensive, and it works well for me. So here you can see the surface of my block has some oil on it. So I'm going to start with an initial wipe down to get the major amounts off. Now I'm following it up with some acetone on a paper towel, cleaning up all the surfaces where we're going to apply sealant. And once I feel I've done a pretty good job, I'm going to follow up with one more pass with a clean towel with acetone on it to make absolutely sure that we've removed all the oil. Alright, we're getting really close here. We've got our gasket material removed. Our oil pan has been flattened out. We've gone ahead and cleaned our surfaces nice with solvent. At this point, don't touch them or you'll risk contaminating them and not getting a good seal. We've cleaned our threads, we've cleaned our fasteners, we've counted our fasteners to make sure that we have what we need. Now, we're about to close this thing up. Now is your last chance to make sure you've torqued all your bolts down if you've been doing other work inside the motor. And also, take a moment, look around, make sure you haven't dropped anything in there, that there's no debris, and nothing that shouldn't belong. Last thing you want to do is reassemble your engine and have problems. Logically, you want to make sure you have everything you need ahead of time. No surprises. We've got all our fasteners. I've got a little breaker bar with a socket to fit them because I'm going to snug these on by hand at first. And then I've got a torque wrench for torquing everything down. I've got a socket extension so that I can work along these lengths of the oil pan here. And I've got an adapter on my torque wrench to make sure that it fits this socket and this extension. Now you're also going to want to make sure that you do this during a time when you're not going to have interruptions. Make sure the kids are put to bed and they're not going to be screaming at you. Make sure your wife isn't going to be nagging you to do something. Or ladies, if you're doing this project, make sure your husband isn't going to be nagging you to do something. Go take a pee ahead of time. Make sure that there's not going to be any distractions. This is where things get critical. Now, as far as the sealant, there's been a lot of debate online if you do some searches, but the winner seems to be the Permatex Ultra Black. At least in my situation with the Saturn, this is what people are reporting good results with. People have also reported good results with the OEM sealant made by GM, but you're going to pay a premium for that. And the issue that I've read about that seems to be if you use the OEM stuff, it cures very fast. So an amateur like me, tinkering on my car in the garage, I may not be able to get this put together fast enough to get a quality seal. The Permatex Ultra Black RTV takes longer to cure. I can apply it. I can go ahead and get things lined up, get assembled, take some time to make sure that I do a quality job, and have no worries. So, do your homework. Choose what you want to use. Personally, I'm using this Ultra Black. You can give me crap for it if you want, but I think it's the right choice. Here's one more quick tip that I read about online, and I thought this was a really smart idea. Now remember, the RTV sealant on our oil pan, once it touches the mating surface of the block, it's going to bond. At that point, we don't want it moving around or smearing. So I've temporarily installed 2 studs to make sure that our oil pan goes on straight. So these are going to go through 2 of the holes on the oil pan and prevent it from moving around. Now I didn't have any studs that were the right thread for this, so I simply took 2 bolts and cut the heads off. Okay, now we're going to carefully apply a bead of sealant.
Hey, Dad.
Okay, let's try this again. I'm going to apply my bead of RTV inside of this groove, and I'm going to be sure to go around each side of each bolt hole. How much RTV to use? Well, I read that about a 4mm bead is the appropriate size. Doesn't seem like a lot to me, but that's what they say works. 4mm is about the width of that little groove. So, let's give this a shot. One topic that seemed to come up online is whether or not to let this RTV skin before installing the oil pan to the motor. And the answer was no, because you want it to adhere to the surface of the block. And if you let it skin over first, that's not going to happen. Here's a tip. Make sure you have enough RTV on hand. I was really squeezing this by the time I got to the end. This is a tube I was using on other things as well. Luckily, I do have another tube here, but I was able to get out just enough for this. If I didn't have enough, that really would have sucked. And here we go. I'm going to use the studs that I installed as temporary guides. And I'm just going to set it down like that. At this point, I'll just start installing my bolts by hand. Now I am putting a small amount of blue Loctite on these. Now that I've got all of my bolts started, I can go ahead and remove my temporary studs and put in the last bolts. I've got all my bolts started. The pan is still just resting here. Now I'm going to go ahead and just snug them down by hand until I feel a little bit of resistance. I'm not tightening them at all. Okay, I've got all my bolts snug down by hand. Now I'm going to use this torque wrench to tighten them up. The specification for this car is 80 inch-pounds. You'll want to check what yours is. I'm going to take some advice that I read online. It might help, might not, probably couldn't hurt. And I'm going to tighten these about halfway all the way around, and then I'm going to come back and tighten them down to the full specification. Also, anytime I tighten something with a pattern like this, and it's the same whether you're installing a head, an oil pan, valve cover, you typically want to go in a pattern working your way from the middle out from side to side. Typically I do a spiral pattern where I start towards the middle on one side, opposite, come back, and work my way out towards the outer edges in a spiral pattern. There, all done. Torquing. To me, it's pretty important. My feeling is things were engineered to work a certain way, and who am I to decide otherwise? Plus, I don't like broken bolts. They're a pain in the butt. Anything I can do to avoid that helps. Plus, disassembly later shouldn't have problems. Well, theoretically, we know it doesn't really work out perfectly. But, you know, I've got a couple friends. One of them, he doesn't believe in torquing. He just tightens things down and calls it good. I don't know, he seems to get along okay. I bought him a torque wrench for his birthday once, and I doubt he's ever used it. But that's his deal. Do what you want. Personally, I torque things down to specification because I like to follow instructions when I don't know what a better way is. Now, I've got another friend who's been turning wrenches his whole life, and he's very good at what he does, and he typically just torques things down by feel. He's experienced, and I guess he can do that. He seems to have good luck with it, and it works for him. So make your own decisions. Personally, I think a torque wrench is a good investment. I have this small one for little things like this, and then I've got a large one for doing things like lug nuts and other big jobs. When I was putting on that 4mm bead of RTV, it really didn't seem like a lot, but now that we've got everything torqued down and I'm looking at how much squished out the sides, I can see that 4mm is an appropriate amount, and I'm pleased with the way that this turned out. A lot of people watching this video are probably doing this job with the engine in the car, which means you're probably wondering, how long do you need to wait before you can run the engine? This RTV is soft, it hasn't cured, pressure inside the engine could blow the seal out. Well, the general consensus varies widely. Some professionals have said that they do this job and have the car out the door in 30 minutes. Well, maybe they're using the OEM sealant that cures faster, I'm not entirely sure. Other people say 12 hours or 24 hours. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. You know, I'd say the better chance that this has to cure, the better it's going to seal. So I'd probably be pleased with a 24-hour window. I'd say wait as long as you can. So as I work my way through these projects, I learn as I go, and I like to share that information with others in hopes that it can help other people with their projects. So if you found this video useful and well presented, I'd love to hear from you. You might give me a thumbs up or leave me a comment. Tell me about your project. I'd really like to hear about it. On the other hand, if you have criticisms or think that I really botched things up here, feel free to post that too. So I thank you for watching, and if you're interested in other aspects of this project or other things that I might be working on, please check out my channel and consider subscribing. Thanks a lot.